in an equally abnormal form were data molded in them for evoking the sacred impulse of love. In the presences of the beings of contemporary times, there also arises and is present in them as much as you please of that strange impulse which they call love. But this love of theirs is firstly also the result of certain crystallized consequences of the properties of the same Kundabuffer. And secondly, this impulse of theirs arises and manifests itself in the process of every one of them entirely subjectively. So subjectively and so differently that if 10 of them were asked to explain how they sensed this inner impulse of theirs, then all 10 of them, if of course they for once replied sincerely, and frankly confessed their genuine sensations and not those they had read about somewhere and had obtained from somebody else, all 10 would reply differently and describe 10 different sensations. One would explain the sensation in the sexual sense, another in the sense of pity, a third in the sense of desire for submission, a fourth in a common craze for outer things, and so on and so forth. But not one of the 10 could describe even remotely the sensation of genuine love. And none of them would, because in none of the ordinary beings men here has there ever been for a long time any sensation of the sacred being impulse of genuine love. And without this taste, they cannot even vaguely describe that most beatific sacred being impulse in the presence of every three-centered being of the whole universe, which, in accordance with the divine foresight of great nature, forms those data in us, from the result of the experiencing of which we can blissfully rest from the meritorious labors actualized by us for the purpose of self-perfection. Here in these times, when one of those three-brained beings loves somebody or other, then he loves him either because the latter always encourages and undeservingly flatters him, or because his nose is much like the nose of that female or male with whom, thanks to the cosmic law of polarity or type, a relation is established which has not yet been broken. Or, finally, he loves him only because the latter's uncle is in a big way of business and may one day give him a boost, and so on and so forth. But never do beings men here love with genuine, impartial, and non-egoistic love. Thanks to this kind of love in the contemporary beings here, their hereditary predispositions to the crystallizations of the consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer are crystallized at the present time without hindrance, and finally become fixed in their nature as a lawful part of them. And as regards the third sacred being impulse, namely essence hope, its plight in the presences of the three-centered beings here is even worse than with the first two. Such a being impulse has not only finally adapted itself in them to the whole of their presences in a distorted form, but this maleficent, strange hope, newly formed in them, which has taken the place of the being impulse of sacred hope, is now already the principal reason why factors can no longer be acquired in them for the functioning of the genuine being impulse of faith, love, and hope. In consequence of this newly formed abnormal hope of theirs, they always hope in something, and thereby all those possibilities are constantly being paralyzed in them, which arise in them either intentionally from without or accidentally by themselves, which possibilities could perhaps destroy in their presences their hereditary predispositions to the crystallizations of the consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer. When I returned from the mountain Bezinyama to the city of Babylon, I continued my observations in order to make it clear whether it was not possible somehow or other to help these unfortunates in some other way. During the period of my year of special observations on all of their manifestations and perceptions, I made it categorically clear to myself that although the factors for engendering in their presences the sacred being impulses of faith, hope, and love are already quite degenerated in the beings of this planet, nevertheless, the factor which ought to engender that being impulse on which the whole psyche of beings of a three-brain system is in general based, and which impulse exists under the name of objective conscience, is not yet atrophied in them, but remains in their presences almost in its primordial state. Thanks to the abnormally established conditions of external ordinary being existence existing here, this factor has gradually penetrated and become embedded in that consciousness which is here called subconsciousness, in consequence of which it takes no part whatever in the functioning of their ordinary consciousness. Well then, it was just then that I indubitably understood with all the separate ruminating parts representing the whole of my I, that if the functioning of that being factor still surviving in their common presences were to participate in the general functioning of that consciousness of theirs, in which they pass their daily, as they here say, waking existence, only then would it still be possible to save the contemporary three-brained beings here from the consequences of the properties of that organ, which was intentionally implanted into their first ancestors. My further meditations then confirmed for me that it would be possible to attain this only if their general being existence were to flow for a long time under foreseeingly corresponding conditions. When all the above mentioned was completely transubstantiated in me, I decided to consecrate the whole of myself from that time on to the creation here of such conditions that the functioning of the sacred conscience still surviving in their subconsciousness might gradually pass into the functioning of their ordinary consciousness. May the blessing of our almighty, omni-loving, common Father, unibeing, Creator, endlessness, be upon my decision. Amen. Thus ended the legomenism concerning the deliberations of the very saintly, incomparable Ashiata Shiyamash, under the title of The Terror of the Situation. So, my boy, when, as I have already told you, early in my last descent in person onto the surface of your planet, I first became acquainted in detail with this legomenism, which I've just repeated, I had at once become interested in the deductions of this later, most high, very saintly common cosmic individual Ashiata Shiyamash. There existed neither any other legomenisms nor any other source of information concerning his further very saintly activities among those favorites of yours. So I then decided to investigate in detail and without fail to make clear to myself which were the measures he took and how he subsequently actualized them in order to help these unfortunates to deliver themselves from the consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer which had passed to them by heredity and were so maleficent for them. And so, as one of my chief tasks during this last sojourn of mine in person there on the surface of your planet, I made a detailed investigation and elucidation of the whole of the further very saintly activities there among your favorites of that great essence-loving, now